Okay, so we just launched Content Strategy and Operations, and this means that from a research standpoint, data collection, just our own work with clients, it's going to get a lot more attention. So I'm super excited about that. And some of you may know we have our big annual conference. It's actually in Las Vegas this year. And we're going to be talking about some new things there related to content. So actually, I'm giving you a sneak peek. That's really what this presentation is about. And also, I wanted to introduce a little bit of new research we have that probably will just confirm some of what you already know, and also just give you a look at some of the models and frameworks we use when we're working with clients talking about content. And you know, Andrew already said a couple of things that very much resonate with what we're doing in terms of content really being about connecting. Content's about engagement. What we call content is changing dramatically, so we'll talk about any number of those things. You know, one of the things that is particularly interesting about content is that we find it's a bit of a paradox in organizations. So we all recognize that content is the fuel for marketing, always has been, and yet we have infrequently seen a content team stood up in even the larger enterprises, right? Now we're starting to see that now, but I gotta tell you, it's still by no means a majority of enterprises that have a distinct content organization. What you more typically find are content operatives sprinkled across the organization. And everybody's kind of wrestling for control. Everybody wants to have a voice in content. Nobody wants to really be responsible ultimately for the content. So it really is an interesting paradox. In fact, recently I was talking to a friend's dad, older gentleman who was doing marketing for like silicon chip companies back in the 70s. And we were joking about how so much has changed with content, and yet at the same time, so much hasn't. In that, even back then, when content was printed brochures, boxes of stuff, some of the same problems existed in terms of being driven from consistent messaging, having a true content strategy as opposed to a list of things you're going to do, a bill of materials, or BOM as we like to call it. Strategy does not equal a BOM, but you still see that happening all the time in organizations, right? And so we joked about the fact that even with the internet, a lot of the same problems still exist. But let's take a look at what we can kind of learn from the internet. This is an interesting Google Trends slide. We run this every couple of months, and it doesn't change. And what we see that's really interesting is that content marketing comes up a lot, comes up a ton. Look at the dichotomy, though, between discussion of content marketing versus all of these other things that are frankly so important related to content marketing, really the things that create. So content strategy, technology, right? Now it's, you know, a really confusing mix of technology. Content operations, content marketing software. There's many more we could add to this list, but you can see there's a vast difference in what shows up in a Google Trends chart, which is very indicative of what we find going on in the industry. And the fact of the matter is, while organizations all say they do content marketing, far less frequently do they have the foundation in place for good content marketing. And in fact, I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about a different definition for content marketing than what you might be used to. And I'm just going to ask, does anyone have, can I grab a bottle of water? Because I can feel I'm drying out. Oh no, I got one. Fantastic. So let me put this, yeah, that's not going to work. Let me just open this real quick. So when we talk about content, all right. Should have opened that before, huh? Okay. All right. This is an interesting chart. And I think Andrew spoke a little bit about how difficult it is to get content done right. This is another one, much to my surprise, frankly, that has stayed the same. You know, we ask these same questions, we do benchmarking every year, and still we find that organizations will say they're spending more than ever on content, and yet there's still a ton of waste. The area of content audit is one we work with our customers on, frankly, most frequently. It's where a lot of organizations that are attempting a content transformation start with audit. And they will figure out that between 60 and 70% of their content is no good. It's not usable, it's not findable. Folks consider it trivial, out of date. I mean, there's a bunch of different reasons. Findability tends to be the big one. But that metric on the left is really linked to the one on the right, right? So folks will also say, yeah, we don't have an enterprise approach to content. It's being handled at all the different silos in marketing. So in some ways, this isn't too surprising. There's a ton of redundancy. I bet many of us here have experienced how easy it is to end up with redundant content in an organization. So a huge amount of waste. And yet, we all know how important content is, right? If you don't have content, you've got no way to engage with your audience. So you can see here, and this is from a study we did a couple of years ago, and again, you'll see in a moment, really hasn't changed. When we ask people what are the most important things that impact them as they go through a buy cycle with vendors they're looking at, they will talk about things like analyst reports, about other customers, and also sales presentations, all being really important assets. And you know, the sales presentation here, it used to be we all would talk about the fact that, oh gosh, people do an internet search, they start there, they get through 60% of the buy cycle before they talk to sales. We stopped saying that a few years ago because what we learned was that sales interactions are part of that, 60% of the journey. And quite often that sales presentation is something that's given via WebEx or whatever online as part of that journey. So you see that that comes up high. I was talking to a friend of mine who runs an agency out of London, and they've been doing content for years. They do a great job. And he said to me, you know what? Content's dead. I said, don't tell me that because we just launched a content service. I really don't want to hear that. But what he said was, it's not about content anymore, it's about engagement. And we should get away from the term content as being everything. Well, you could argue that, but what's important is to talk about content driving engagement. So in a recent buyer study we did, we asked the questions a little bit differently, and we asked what assets were most impactful through the buyer journey, and we just simplified that to 3 phases for the focus of the survey. And you see the same things come up, analyst reports, case studies. Then we asked, what about the core information in those assets, and at what point in the buyer journey are they important? And clear articulation of value. This seems obvious and self-evident, and yet it's one of the hardest things we do, particularly as our products and solutions become more complex. In fact, I was recently talking with an agency that specializes in virtual reality and augmented reality. And the gentleman there made the point that most of his clients are companies with an incredibly difficult value proposition, and you need to actually kind of enter the product and experience it. Some really interesting stuff going on there, like with medical device companies. In any case, what is the core information? And then self-guided interactions, okay? So some inbound versus provider-guided interactions. And obviously, searching the internet is up there real high. No surprise there. I like the fact that in education for provider-guided interactions, webinars came out real strong and probably lets us all breathe a sigh of relief since we're all still doing a lot of webinars. They really do work. So this is an interesting look. Now, consider everything that's happening with all this stuff going on. Isn't it surprising that yet many people still don't have a single content team that's there to sort of facilitate the whole mix? And we know that when there is a team in place, it really makes a difference. Again, we're still not seeing this quite as often as we would have hoped by now, but I think we are seeing an increasing number of teams being stood up, whether it's called the content marketing team, content strategy and operations, which is kind of our preference. So this is interesting. Medium to strong impact across some really important areas. So on website traffic, brand recognition, so all the awareness things you'd want, but also increased conversion rates and a lower cost per lead when you actually have a team focused on managing content. Now, this is not to say, and we always say to our clients, we're not suggesting that you put a content mommy in place, so a content strategy and operations organization that's going to take care of everything and basically toe the line. You can't do that because content can and should come from all over the organization. The goal is to facilitate the processes to make it easier for people to be successful. And this can be an interesting balancing act. We spend probably more time with our clients dealing with the cross-functional alignment and cultural issues than anything else. That's the hardest part of this equation because, again, everybody has a hand in content. They want to be involved. They really don't want to be ultimately responsible. It's a difficult thing and a balancing act to make work. So when you have that team, what does it look like? And we've spent a lot of time on this, and basically our articulation here of what that team should look like is based on what we see outperforming companies do when it comes to content. So does this mean it's 3 people? Maybe, you know, it could be less. We are still seeing some folks stand this up as a virtual team in the beginning and then moving to a real team. These may be teams within each of these 3 pillars, but certainly you need content strategy, you need content operations and content factory. In fact, I was going to bring up your squeezy house. I'm so glad that says, how is your content factory? You'll see why in a moment. But when we talk about content strategy, you know, too many organizations will still say, oh, my content strategy is we're going to do 6 white papers and we're ebooks. Okay, that's not a strategy, right? You need an audience-based, requirements-driven process that's repeatable and scalable to have a true strategy. Content operations, that's everything to, you know, manage, measure, and optimize the whole life cycle, which has become really complex. And not only is there a lot of technology to consider here, but also, you know, technology integrations and measurement. And Andrew spoke a little bit about measurement. Okay, so content factory. This is an interesting area. We did not used to have this as the 3rd pillar, but it's become clearer and clearer that either creative services and content project management is coming together in organizations, or the content factory is replacing creative services or vice versa, or you've got content project managers that are working directly with a creative services function. But increasingly, being able to show that you can scale and maintain quality and provide the right kind of governance across the whole organization is really critical. So this is what the team looks like. So if we have this team, does this team do what we know as content marketing? Does that mean they do everything? Is content marketing synonymous with marketing? You know, we have found that the term content marketing kind of has been used so generically that it's not really helpful. There's a lot of murkiness around what is truly marketing, content marketing. So we've spent some time talking to a lot of our clients, and we've come up with what we think is a definition that makes sense. And this is actually the first time I'm talking about it. I would love feedback. We haven't published anything on it yet, but we thought that there was value in creating a distinct definition for what is content marketing versus what is marketing with content. So let me have you take a look at that real quick. This is my fun new slide. And you can see that we're saying that content marketing as a discipline is really about inbound, okay? So it is about maintaining that always channel, and the content that's in there, and this is probably top of funnel in most cases, the content that's in there has to have these attributes. And we'd venture to go so far as to say that without all of these attributes, it's not really content marketing. At least it's not good content marketing, right? So audience-focused is probably number 1. Theme-based and topic-led. It needs to be more about your audience than it is about you at that point. But differentiated, puts you out there as a thought leader, and you have to frequently be putting new content out. Now, if that content marketing is doing the right job, it is entering folks into a nurture stream that pulls them into what we're calling marketing with content. So mid-funnel and lower funnel, more of the outbound programmatic things happening from the different teams within marketing, the different silos, if you will. So campaign marketing, field marketing, and so on. And if we're doing a good job here, you're integrating that content marketing, those assets into the full plan of inbound and outbound for any particular area. So the idea is to integrate all of this in order to really be effectively using content. So the next question that you might ask is, all right, so which part does that content strategy and ops team do? And I think that's a bit of a moving target. We would venture to say, in a best case, they're really managing that always-on channel, working very closely with the web team, ensuring that it has what it needs. The idea is to increase the digital footprint for the organization on an ongoing basis, and to be very strong in SEO and SEM. That is so critical. We know that that's how people get to us. So if you can't make sure that you're found, you're going to have a hard time with the entire content life cycle, whether it's inbound or outbound. So again, the idea is the integration of these things in order to have really high-performing content. Okay, so that leads us to this. These are sort of our four little houses of what we've done at SiriusDecisions. You know, we've been working for years with clients on helping them from a process, an operational standpoint with different frameworks and such. And we've realized that we needed a bit of an organizing principle, and that would help us take to our clients kind of a way to get them started in establishing their own priorities. So we've spent some time coming up with priority architectures for each of our services. And so for the first time, we spent time on this with content strategy and ops. And we brought it down to just 4 pillars. And you can certainly see they are reflective of what's in that content hub, if you will. But the idea is to look at these areas in the context of where are challenges likely to fall. And we think certainly it's in the strategy area, right? We see a lot of folks with issues in strategy, content management and technology, increasingly complex, the content factory we talked about, and then functional design and development, which is really important in this service, since again, it is very likely that if there is an organization, it's new, it probably needs some help in upskilling, needs to look at a maturity model. What does that org look like in year 1 versus year 3, and so on. So for each of these pillars, we have kind of a core anchoring model that we use to help organize our clients' thoughts around this. And we just find that's really helpful. And if, you know, for many of you, you're using different technologies like acrolinks, being able to have a starting point, a line in the sand in the way that you do things in a particular pillar, and then choosing the right technology to support that is absolutely key. So I want to make sure I don't take too much time, so feel free to wave at me. I'm going to take you through just a little bit of each of these, and then that will be it for me, and we'll take some questions. So in strategic content planning, the kinds of things that we hear from our content clients is that they've got unhappy internal customers, right? And it seems to harken back to the fact there's not a clear strategy. So we have product marketing people saying, we call them portfolio marketing as well, hey, I've been supplying content to you and I have no idea how it's doing. Now you're coming to me again. You want me to spend all this time on content. You can't even tell me if what I did last year was any good. Tell you what, when you can get back to me with what worked, then I'll work with you. Guessing at what's really needed. So a lot of this comes back to measurement. Well, in order to measure, you have to start with a strategy. You have to establish KPIs before you ever create any content. So this is an important area. And we have a process that we use. We encourage our clients, you know what, if you're not using ours, make sure you're using something. But content strategy just shouldn't be, you know, whatever your subject matter specialist thinks. You need a rigorous process. So we like this turbine idea because a turbine is a machine that generates power, and we think of content as really the power, the energy for marketing. And the idea here is to go through some rigor, starting with audience insights at the top. Don't do anything until you have that. And quite often we'll say to our content folks, you should be able to access that from portfolio or product marketing. And then really defining the buyer's journey. That's the process we mean there. and the interactions that the buyer should have with both marketing and sales, both inbound and outbound through that buyer journey. Understanding that and understanding what they need to know at what point in the buyer journey, that's what drives the strategy. So we think of it as a requirements architecture before you figure out what that bomb is. So that's really critical. And then setting clear objectives for the content, making sure that you have the raw materials. Some of it may be internal, some of it may be external. Only then do you start saying, okay, white paper, ebook, interactive app, whatever it is. You don't start with those deliverables, you end with them. So that's a look at our content strategy. I'm going to move to the next one, content management and technology. So the biggest thing that comes up in what we consider this area is this difficulty with having content just all over the place, multiple repositories. Really difficult to get your arms around. So one of the first things we often do with our clients is audit. Also, just the cross-functional alignment. One of the tools that we make available is a basic RACI, responsibility matrix. Everybody wants to get their hands on that with some idea of what should it be, and we know that from through best practices. It's a really difficult area, understanding what does everybody do when they have their hands in the whole content lifecycle in the content ecosystem. And then there's the measurement issue. This has been the biggest mystery, particularly measuring content separately from everything else. So this year, what I'm doing right now with my research partner is working on a presentation called How to Build a Content Measurement Dashboard. And we think that's going to be a very important one that we have at Summit. In fact, it was voted on to be given again, so we're going to give it twice. We're really excited about that. It's very practical with the steps on exactly how to do that, what metrics to collect. So it gets interesting here. So this particular area is where our content model comes up. This is what we consider our anchor model for content overall, and basically all of our services have access to this because it's so central to marketing. The idea here is to basically document what is really happening in an organization in order to get content produced. So in other words, this is not some net new thing. This is basically depicting what's happening in order to get through these phases, which you have to get through to have content. You have to start with insight and strategy. You have to create, you have to activate or distribute, and then you have to optimize. The question is, are you doing it to the best of your ability in the organization? What are your problems? What are your gaps, right? So the top row in blue there, that's what we consider to be the stages for each phase. They're connected in a work stream. What's in green are really the deliverables of each of those stages. That's where we tend to have models and tools that help our clients, because that's where everybody struggles, honestly. In blue are all the different things all the different activities that may actually align in that particular area. But what we find is people have a lot of trouble with strategy, messaging, content audit in particular. So we work with folks on all of those areas. In fact, we also do a gap analysis against that model. When we work with clients, it's one of the first things we'll do when we bring in a new client. And it's really fascinating because the gap analysis is designed to get all of the different silos in marketing basically kind of voting on what's the activities that we're doing, what are the most important activities, how are we doing, how are we performing with those activities, and do we understand who's responsible for what, and do we think it's the right person? And I have been surprised in my time at Sirius at how often these gap analyses are similar to each other for an enterprise company. In that, it ends up being that whole content model, kind of red light, green light, yellow light, and gray for cases where nobody knows who's responsible. So what we find is that, in fact, I'm just going to go back. So here in the content model itself, we find that in that insight area, tons of red. Guess what? Nobody really knows what the messaging framework is, or it's not getting done. That's a little bit scary. So there'll be a ton of red there. There'll be some red and yellow in creation. Activation will be all green. And then optimization will be filled with gray and red. And you can very quickly figure out, okay, So folks don't have a strategy. They don't really have a messaging framework they're using. They don't know the buyer's journey. So guess what? When you get to optimize, how are you going to optimize? You don't have any KPIs to optimize against. But everybody's churning out content, right? Most companies will say, oh yeah, we're activating, right? We're distributing content, but it's not grounded in good strategy. So it's really interesting, and it's just very interesting that the problems are so common across the enterprise. Okay, let me move to the next piece, which is inside of content management and technology. I mentioned that audit is often where we start. So we identify audit as part of Optimize, but guess what? Most companies, when they're looking at content transformation, that's where they start. Because you have to know what you have in order to figure out what you don't have, right? And this is where they tend to figure out that they've got like 60% of what they have isn't really working. So again, a rigorous process, very much step by step. We probably spend more time in inquiry with our clients on this than anything else. And it's about looking at all of the systems and repositories in place, understanding what's there. So once you get to the sort of the end of this cycle, you can rationalize and optimize based on what you've learned. Then eliminating the easy stuff, separating the wheat from the chaff, if you will. Right off the bat, ROT actually stands for redundant, outdated, and trivial. And there's often a lot of that. You can get rid of it quickly before you really have to dig in and read the long copy. Developing a taxonomy and an architecture, right? You really have to map your content, taking everything you have and mapping it in an architecture that organizes it effectively for usage, and then having a way to put new content into that architecture, and then optimizing and maintaining. And we typically tell people somebody on the team should be assigned to monthly maintenance where they're making sure anything that should be sunset, that's happening. How much of us have stuff on our website that we know shouldn't be there, you know, right? And also placing new content into that architecture. So that's audit. Okay, the content factory. And again, this is an interesting area that we've begun to talk about because, you know, creative services is often the same thing as the content factory. And folks are saying that their processes are a problem. I don't think we've encountered a client yet that says that their processes are working perfectly when it comes to production. And they've generally got some unhappy internal clients. Sometimes it's because the clients internally are sitting on stuff too long, and that's why deadlines aren't met. Even when that's the case, and it's easy to say, well, hey, it's not our fault. You know, our subject matter folks sat on it. You know what? We still have to find a way to make this process work for everybody. How do you scale? How do you get everybody on the same page so that they want to work within your guidelines? It makes it easier for them to produce content. And then there's the whole issue of managing what's getting done by agencies in the outside versus what's done internally, maintaining a level of quality. So this really is creation. It's the creation part of our model. And if you think of it as a factory, and you know, I had a factory picture. It was kind of like your little block. They wouldn't let me use it. I guess it was a little too cute. But anyway, there's key inputs going inside. So I've highlighted here from our model what is absolutely critical before content starts to be created in that creation phase. And then coming out, content activation. So one of the things we find is that stuff is created and nothing is ever done with it. And really, everybody should be working toward 100%. The idea that we would produce content that never gets used is just horrible, right? 100% activation, and then translation, localization, or other types of adaptation of content. So making sure if you're creating some big primary assets that you've got lots of derivative assets that can be used in different ways. We call it like the heavily leveraged content model, if you will. So that's a look at the content factory. And then, this is my second to last slide, so we're almost done. I think, are we okay time-wise? Good, excellent, okay. Functional design and development. We have found that in this area, again, because this is a somewhat new area, that our clients are really looking for some competency mapping. What we typically find is if folks are looking to put together this team, they'll look for people in the org who are good project managers, right? Certainly writers and editors or creative people. Sometimes you might pull someone out of product marketing to be part of the content team, but they're looking to understand how do I figure out what competencies I need in the team, How do I upskill the team? So we have some tools for that. And very importantly, and this is a piece that often gets left on the table, certainly in the first year or two, you have to figure out what is the upskilling you need to do to the rest of the org, right? Because if you've got all these different people providing content and using content, they need to understand your processes and have to have enough of an understanding of, audience, buyer journey, and all of that to make it work. So one of the things that we typically work on is how do we provide some training to the rest of the organization, again, so they don't feel like they have, a content police, but in a way that is going to make their lives easier and is going to ensure that the content that they create gets used, creates success, and all of that. Okay, so all of this to say that we believe content transformation is upon all of us. Now, when I first joined SiriusDecisions, one of my colleagues was working on this, and I said, you know what? Transformation's a little bit scary. I've been in, IT marketing for years, and it's always this issue of, do we want to say you need transformation? That scares people away. Well, what's interesting here is that we've parsed it into pieces, right? Transformation can be scary, but almost every company we talk to needs some level of transformation in their content area. So the idea is, how can you break it into phases, which we've done here into these 3 phases, and make it manageable? And then really break it down into specific tasks so that it's doable. And what we've got here are the 3 phases, which make sense: plan, build, and improve. Very much matches that content model. And then the pillars are strategy, people, process, and technology. And these are the things we work with our clients on. So the point here is to, and by the way, it doesn't have to be a 3-year process. Could be longer, could be far less. It really depends on where a company is. So in transformation is, all it means is getting you to where you need to be from where you are. That could mean so many things, right? But the idea is to take something that is typically has been an area of challenge for organizations, which is the content ecosystem, and turn it into a competitive differentiator. So like Andrew was saying, really your content machine should be supporting your business objectives. Marketing objectives, sure, but ultimately it should be part of the revenue engine. And if you can make that alignment happen, where you can say, you know what, our content is competitive, differentiated, and it makes a difference. We can look at our pipeline and our closed business and see how our content impacted it. So that's what I have for you today. So I think I'm on time here. Great. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
If no one else is going to ask. So one of the things you seem to be characterizing is this, what some other people are talking, this kind of content center of excellence in the organization.
Yes.
Is that a reasonable way to characterize
Yeah,
it?
we think of it as a COE or content hub.
And if in that kind of framework, and you mentioned it in a couple of places, somewhere you had retention was one of the tasks you were looking at, customer retention, churn management, all those things.
Yep.
This is not just about marketing content, right? I think one of the interesting things is that those lines are kind of blurring quite a lot. Could you say a little bit about?
You know what? And this is why I'll tell you what. Right now at SiriusDecisions, probably one of our hottest services is ABM, right? Everything's moved to the cloud. Everybody's got a customer success team now, which is code for sell them more, right? And everybody needs to understand how to keep selling to the same people, how to keep customers happy. So how do you differentiate what's your content for account-based marketing? So that's certainly one area. And then there's all the other kinds of content that swirls around in order to keep people going. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. Thank you so much, everybody. And if you want to chat, please come right up to me.